All right. So with that, I'd like to walk you through some basic best practices, as we are calling them, key mantras, and talk about how we've applied them, to our packet selections and how we've used them. So I've got a list of them down here. If you can see them on slide 24, I will walk through each one of them one by one, but just reading them out really quick, and then we'll go through each of them one by one. It is important to make sure you choose the best fit package for your customer. It is important to make sure you evaluate for the full solution and not just basic content management needs, for example. It is very critical to look at important business requirements and not everything, because keep in mind, and we'll talk about this, that there are specific things that are typically most important to a particular customer or a particular business, which is the why question. Why are you investing in a WCXM solution? So it's important to focus on those critical business needs. You do want to pay a lot of attention to the users of the system, particularly the content authors and the editors of the system, and make sure that you're focusing on their process and their needs. Then, as I mentioned, you do want to use scenarios to drive a detailed evaluation process. Any vendor demonstrations you do should be aligned with those scenarios, and we'll talk about this in a bit, but you should avoid using an approach where the demo is canned. Instead, you want to make sure that demo is based on the real business scenario that you define. And finally, to the extent possible and time and budget permitting, you do want to get some degree of hands-on support with the package. In other words, you do want to get hands-on yourself with the package, get your hands dirty, try it out, and before you recommend something that you're going to spend $1 million in licensing or something like that on, get to feel the package yourself, right? That is quite critical. So without any further ado, let me walk through them one by one. All right, so here's the first one, right, for you, which is choose the best fit package for the customer. And the point is pretty simple here, right? You don't want to blindly follow the analysts or the marketing buzz or the hype. There's a lot of hype around certain packages. There's a lot of marketing buzz around some of them. There's a lot of analyst reports out there which are very good and very useful, don't get me wrong, but you don't want to blindly follow that. You want to use that as input, but then you want to ask the basic question of the why, and then articulate your customer needs as use cases so that you're mapping the data sensibly, right? So it's important to map features and functions that you're asking for to business use cases. So it's not about whether workflows are delivered better by package A or package B. It's about this is what my customer needs, and correspondingly this is the package that is likely to work, right? Which basically leads to the idea or the notion of saying bye-bye feature-driven selection and hello business use case-driven selection, right? Which is don't get into criteria which just says I need workflow or I need multi-site. Get into criteria which says, well, here is my use case for workflows and here is my use case for multi-site, right? So that's an important one to start with. The next one, and we kind of talked to this before as well, is that recognize the breadth of your solution, right? Recognize the full breadth of what you're trying to build and what you're trying to deliver, and then try and articulate that breadth via some sort of a conceptual architecture view, right? With the ability to say that while we do need content management and delivery capabilities, we also probably need social engagement capabilities and personalization capabilities. And by the way, these are the various pieces of the puzzle that we need to fulfill those capabilities, right? And as you think about that, keep in mind that there are two different solution models of how these apply to packages, right? One solution model is the idea of what I refer to as a pre-integrated single vendor suite. The other is the idea of a custom integrated best of breed model, right? So obviously in the former model, you're trying to find a fairly significant player in the market who claims to have an offering that can seamlessly deliver all the capabilities you need in an experience management solution, from web content management to digital asset management to search to social to personalization, and really has a full suite around those capabilities that is fully functional and is fully pre-integrated, right? Your other choice, which is an equally valid choice for a customer and a consultant to consider, given the current marketplace we have, is a best-of-breed integrated model or a custom integrated model, right? Where you would, for example, pick something for your WCM system, pick something else for your DAM system, and pick something else for your social system, right? But agreeing on which model you're likely to go down is useful, and it's important because that also defines the scope of your package selection. In other words, are you trying to select a DAM system, a social system, and a WCM system independently, and then trying to integrate all of them together? Or are you trying to find a vendor who has a all-in-one comprehensive pre-integrated solution so that you're saved the hassles of integration. And it's important to define that upfront and say which conceptual model works better for us and why, and what are our choices, right? Correspondingly, that may actually lead to multiple package selection streams, right? For example, in Sapien Nitro, we've done some fairly large implementations where it wasn't just about a CMS or a WCM selection. We got a DAM selection running in parallel, a social selection running in parallel, and a third selection running in parallel. And then you're trying to figure out how all of these things come together. Hence, it's kind of important to look for the complete solution, as I mentioned, as opposed to just pieces of it. All right, the next thing is the notion of separating what I refer to as commodities from differentiators in a package selection, right? And here's what I mean by commodities, right? If you look at the larger, types of capabilities that traditionally content management systems have been used for, they would come down to some fairly basic things. For example, you need the ability to define content types, you need the ability to have content authoring form, and so on and so forth, right? Now the fact is this, the fact is if you look at some of the larger enterprise WCM players, each of them have a reasonable capability across those. Fair enough, they will still have differences in how they deliver that particular aspect of functionality, but it's quite likely that some of those basic library functions, if I can refer to them that way, are not fundamentally different, right? So the last thing you want to do is to spend 5 weeks of effort building a criteria of 50 different evaluation parameters and saying, you know what, out of those 50, 45 of them, all the 4 vendors that we shortlisted are at par. They all do it the same, right? In which case your client is confused and you're confused as to what the real value of this package selection is. Why did we spend 5 weeks just getting to a conclusion that the 3 that we were originally considering can all do the same thing, right? And hence, you really need a method of filtering out the differentiators and highlighting what is relevant to a customer and also what is different about each of the packages. Now this is where, in our experience, a more lightweight tool of doing this filtering has proved to be a lot more beneficial, right? So for example, in this case, we've used this sort of a visual tool, which we refer to as a business context diagram or a BCD, to really plot out the capabilities and then say, okay, how does package A compare to package B, right? And do you have the ability to very quickly do a red, yellow, green type marking and say, this is how each of them compare. And where this helps is that you can then quickly zoom in on the specific differences that matter. You may find that out of 20 things here, 10 of those are at par across the packages you're considering, but maybe 5 or 6 of those are where there are differences, and that's where you want to dive deeper and really understand what the differences are and how they're relevant to their use case. And so that method of quickly filtering out commodities from the differentiators is hence important, right? And you don't want to spend days and weeks doing this. You want to have a process that allows you to get through this very quickly and very efficiently. All right, so moving on, I see some questions coming in the chat panel. I'll take them at the end if that's okay with everyone. I can see a bunch of them coming in, but I'll take them at the end if that's okay. All right, fair enough. So let's move on. The next one I think that's useful and important to consider as well is that ultimately you are delivering the solution, at least the authoring side of the solution, for a bunch of business users, for a bunch of marketers, for a bunch of content authors or editors, right? And hence the question is, they are the guys who are going to drive successful adoption of your solution. They are the guys who are going to accept the solution or not accept the solution for that matter, right? So the question is, when you made a package selection decision, were they involved? Right? Did they see the package in action? Did you apply their authoring process to their needs? And that's quite important because ultimately, technically, you may evaluate the package on 30 different criteria and okay it or deny it. But if your authors and editors are not bought into the process, quite honestly, it's likely to fail when you actually deploy it for your end users, right? And hence, if you kind of think about it that way, you got to think about different